What is happening, everybody? It is Alec Busse, joined as always by Carson Gourdie on the Busse and Gourdie Show. We are coming at you with our first Picks Against the Spread episode. We weren't able to do one for week one with some conflicts in timing and showing and all that other sorts of stuff. And Carson, I feel like that might be a good thing considering week one had a lot of wonkiness and a lot of games that maybe didn't go the way we thought they would. So now we get a good opportunity to really get started on the right foot in week two.
And change picks. I used to be a big Texas guy until I wasn't. So you'll see my pick later regarding Alabama, Texas.
You saw him play Rice in week one, and that was enough to change your mind?
And then I remembered Nick Saban's still a pretty good football coach. So we'll see.
Well, that's what you said about Clemson, and then they got smashed by Duke. So that's open an old can of worms. So let's just dive into
You thought LSU would win the national title, right?
I did not pick that. That's not what I picked. I picked them to go to the playoff. There's a difference, a large difference. All right, let's dive into the picks because I think week two is quietly one of the better weeks of the season. When you look at the overall slate of games, there's a lot of interesting games. There's a lot of interesting lines as well. We're going to run through a lot of them. And there's a lot of interesting storylines with a lot of these games. And you mentioned the Texas-Alabama game. We're going to save that one for last because it is obviously the biggest game of the week and maybe one of the biggest games of the entire regular season. But let's start with number 10, Notre Dame, going to NC State. Notre Dame is -7.5 heading into the Wolfpack. Carson, what are your overall thoughts on this game? Because Notre Dame certainly looked really impressive in their first 2 weeks, but they played a downtrodden Navy team with a first-year head coach, and then they played an FCS opponent in week two. So I think it's kind of hard to get a real temperature on where Notre Dame is at heading into their third game of the regular season.
And I think it's a fair question to ask, where's Brennan Armstrong at, to be honest with you? The transfer quarterback. Is he the same guy that we saw in 2021 with Virginia? He was great. He'd throw 40 touchdowns, only, I think, 10 interceptions. He has gone downhill the past couple of years. I'm pretty confident that Notre Dame would win this game outright, but that is a tough spread to pick because it still is on the road but I still give Notre Dame the quarterback play. I'm going to take Hartman over Brennan Armstrong. Realistically, I think Notre Dame might cover. What is it, 7.5?
Yep. Yeah, we're looking at a 7.5 point line for the Irish.
Yeah, I got to take Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think you look at Notre Dame and the way they've played in the first 2 weeks, it's really hard to not be inspired by the way Sam Hartman's played. 445 yards over the first 2 weeks, and obviously he didn't have to throw it a ton against Navy, particularly in the second half. He's got 6 touchdowns. He's completing over 80% of his passes, which is a pretty ridiculous start to the season. And their rushing attack has been pretty impressive as well, led by Audric Estime. He's at 211 yards through the first 2 weeks of the season. Has a pair of touchdowns as well. I think both of those actually came against Navy. And then even at the receiving position, their receivers have started to improve after last year. A lot of their targets in the passing game went to Michael Meyer, who was obviously a first-round pick at tight end. I like Notre Dame in this game. I think Notre Dame will win. They haven't lost a game to an ACC opponent going all the way back to Miami, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. So it's been a while since Notre Dame lost a regular season ACC game. And I know that going on the road and playing against NC State is not easy. They're one of the more consistent programs in the ACC. But I'm with you. I kind of like where Notre Dame's heading right now. I like the way that Marcus Freeman has that program trending early in his second season, and Sam Hartman has a ton to do with that. So I'm with you. I'm going to take Notre Dame -7.5.
Now, if this was last year with Devin Leary for North Carolina State, maybe I'd take North Carolina State to win outright. Just right now, I think there's too many question marks with Brennan Armstrong.
Yeah, I think we'll kind of see. He's reunited with his old offensive coordinator from Virginia from the 2021 season when they were a pretty prolific offense, and he had a lot of success there. But I think a lot of that success.
Did you look at week one stats?
No, I didn't, but I don't even know who NC State played.
They played UConn. It was 24-14, 150 yards, no passing touchdowns. I don't think he's the same arm slinger that we saw, but he's a very good rusher. He had 96 rushing yards. That's going to be important for North Carolina State.
Well, and also I think when you think back to that 2021 Virginia offense that Armstrong quarterbacked, it was an offense that had a lot of dynamic pass catchers. They had 3 pretty dangerous receivers, and they had 1 or 2 pretty dangerous tight ends, and they had a pretty good rushing attack as well. So you think you combine all those things, and I believe in Brennan Armstrong, the quarterback, and certainly believe him in that offense. But I think just learning the personnel, It's something that's really difficult to do for a quarterback in his first or second outing out. And coaches talk all the time about you improve the most between week 1 and week 2, and I think we could see something like that for Brennan Armstrong.
Yep.
All right, let's go to the next one. This is an interesting one to me because I feel like this one was being hyped up a lot in the preseason as a really interesting week 2 game. This is Utah -8 at Baylor. Obviously, Utah is ranked number 12 in the country. They put a good number on Florida in week 1 on opening night. Baylor had probably the worst performance of any Power 5 team in week 1, losing to Texas State. That was actually the biggest upset of week 1, not Colorado beating TCU in Fort Worth. It was Baylor losing at home to Texas State. That was Texas State's first ever win against a Power 5 school. Still don't necessarily know the full availability of Utah quarterback Cam Rising heading into this game. But to be completely honest with you, I don't know how much I think it matters. I was pretty impressed with the way Utah's Bryson Barnes played at quarterback last week against Florida. He completed 12 of 18, had a touchdown pass in that game. And then also, I thought that their backup, a former highly touted recruit, Nate Johnson, played pretty well. He's certainly more raw. He's got to protect the ball a little bit better. He certainly had some issues there, but he's dynamic when he's got the ball in his hands. And here's the other thing I love about Utah. They're going to hit you in the mouth, and they're going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it for an entire 4 quarters. And that physicality becomes really, really tough to match. And I kind of like Utah to cruise down at Baylor this weekend.
What's Vegas telling us, though? Because if we had to pick a point spread before this week, like let's say 3 days ago we were talking, you didn't know the point spread. And I told you that Baylor lost by 11 points to Texas State. Utah pretty much dominated Florida. Would you think the point spread would only be 8 points?
Yeah, I probably would have predicted it somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5.
Of course you would have. But in reality, I remember last year with Texas A&M and LSU, everyone thought this would be a huge blowout. The spread would be crazy. And it opened up at 7. And LSU, was going to the, SEC title game. And, Texas A&M came out of nowhere and won that game. I think 8 points. I think Vegas is saying maybe Baylor is better than what they were against Texas State. But
they certainly are. They're not that bad.
That's right. Yeah. But Texas State ran the ball through Baylor. I mean, they couldn't stop Texas State. And you're right. We see what Utah does with physicality in that Pac-12. It's a sight to see. And I don't think they're going to lose to Baylor. But if Baylor only lost 24-17, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that Kyle Whittingham runs his program up at Utah. I don't think that they ever get enough attention for the success they've had. And I do think that some of that comes with them being back-to-back 9-3 conference champions and not 11-1 or 10-2. Like, there's a huge difference, I think, in perception when you get that double-digit regular season win mark. And they haven't had that the last couple of seasons, and then they've lost in the Rose Bowl to Ohio State and Penn State in back-to-back years. But Utah's a really good program. And I think this is a good opportunity for them to get some more love on the national level after what they did to Florida in week 1.
It should be a good game. And honestly, dude, if Aranda loses this, it's just going to get more difficult for him. We've talked about it. The buyout's probably pretty expensive. But this Baylor program, I mean, this is crazy. Last year, they were preseason Big 12 favorites, to win the whole conference. It has gone downhill really fast with Dave.
Yeah, I mean, their team talent composite has fallen quite a bit in the last few years under Aranda, and that's certainly a concern. And, he inherited a really good situation from Matt Rule.
Yeah, he did.
Speaking of Matt Rule, let's get to our next pick. That is going to be Nebraska. They are 3-point dogs against Colorado. I feel like we're going to talk about this one for a little bit longer than we have the first two. I feel like everyone in America is on Colorado to not only win this game, but to cover. And I'm not generally someone who loves to just fade the public on a lot of these things. I generally kind of go with what my gut's telling me and what I think is going to happen. But I'm curious what you think is going to happen in this game, Carson, because I think it's a really interesting situation.
No, I think Colorado is going to win by 7-10 points. I don't think Sims can keep up offensively. Nebraska, sure, impressive. You held Minnesota to 10 points. Yeah, a lot of people do. I mean, Minnesota had a new quarterback, no more Mo Abraham, first week jitters. Realistically, is Nebraska really going to slow down Sanders? Are they going to slow down Travis Hunter? I think there is too much skill position talent. And, dude, that home atmosphere is going to be crazy. There's going to be a lot of red there because there always is. Nebraska travels. But Deion Sanders will have his guys ready for this game. This is the chapter of a new rivalry. Matt Rule versus Deion Sanders. Two contrasting methods of how to build a program. Extremely different. But in the short term, Colorado is going to win this game. This opened up as Nebraska, too. This opened up as 1.5 Nebraska. It is flipped to Colorado -3.
Yeah, so I think that this game is a real test of where Colorado's at as a program, which is nuts to say after just 1 week. Because leading up to the TCU game, right, no one believed in them. It was really easy to feed that narrative in Colorado's locker room and within the program as they prepared to go down to Fort Worth. But now everyone in America loves them. Everyone thinks that they're going to win this week. Everyone thinks that everything is all great. There's a ton of swagger. There's a ton of energy around Colorado. People are talking about the chances of Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter potentially being legitimate Heisman candidates. Everyone is talking about how great Deion is and how, we all doubted him, and look at what he did in week 1 in his first opportunity. And I think it's a really good test of are you able to handle positive energy heading into a matchup if you're Colorado? And on the opposite side, I feel like Nebraska, again, in the preseason was getting some positive preseason energy. People are kind of starting to say, hey, this could be a team that maybe surprises in the Big Ten West. They're maybe not as far behind the Nebraska. They're not as far behind as we think behind, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. And then they looked like crap in week 1, and they lost in the same way that they've lost for the last 6 years when Scott Frost was the head coach. So I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics. I think this will be a pretty high-scoring game. We know that Colorado's defense really struggled against TCU. So I would expect it to be high-scoring. You talked about not knowing if Nebraska can keep up. I think that they're going to be able to post a lot of points. I don't think that that's going to be an issue considering what we saw from Colorado's defense in week 1. But yeah, I like Colorado in this game at -3. I think that they're going to put up a ton of points. And I do think it'll continue to get more difficult for them now that defenses will have tape on them and what to expect. So this will be interesting. This is a really interesting game, big noon, again, going to Folsom Field. You talked about the environment. I think it's going to be absolutely bonkers. I mean, people have posted that I think the cheapest ticket is like $400 for this game at Folsom, which is just incredible.
I like it. But the key for Nebraska, you got to run the ball. You got to keep Sanders off the field. You got to keep Travis Hunter off the field. That's going to be the key. Like if we see vintage Matt Rule football, I mean, he does not want this game to get into 40 points. He doesn't even want to get into the high 30s. He needs to win this game like 24-20. I just don't see it. Because Nebraska, last year defense struggled. Scott Frost never really had a great defense. I don't see how they keep up with Colorado's skill position players. It's going to be a fun, entertaining game, though. And I'm happy for Fox. Back-to-back games, Colorado. I mean, they hit a gold mine. This was risky because I think most people around the country before the season would say, oh, they'll go 0-2. Just win 3 games. It's a good year. Who cares if you lose to Nebraska and TCU? They're going to win both. Dude,
Yeah,
I love
the bets are
Pac-12 football.
Welcome to the bandwagon. Enjoy it while it lasts.
Will Platt is just so happy recently. You see him on Colin Coward. You just want to give him a hug.
Yeah, I mean, he believed in it, and he believed in it pretty vocally. I don't think he believed
short term.
What was that?
Did he believe in it short term?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if he believed that they would go down to TCU and win. I mean, I know he believed in their skill position talent. I just think he was concerned about the offensive and defensive lines, which, to be honest with you, that's kind of where everyone was at with Colorado heading into the season. And their depth, I think, is another major concern. So we'll see what happens in this game. Like I said, I think that there's a lot of interesting dynamics that could lead to Colorado dropping this game and then the pendulum swinging completely back the opposite way on Colorado and Deion Sanders. But like you talked about, you think it's going to be an entertaining game. I think every Colorado game the rest of the season will be highly entertaining, must-watch TV. And I think you could kind of say the same thing about Nebraska, considering the storylines and the dynamic around that program and the way they lost their first game. So it's just a fun matchup.
It's great. And, they border each other, old Big 8 rivals. There's actually a coworker of mine, the anchor. Her husband's from Nebraska. So, of course, he's a Nebraska football fan. Guess what he was doing yesterday or a couple days ago?
Watching Colorado highlights.
He was on the web looking to buy a Colorado sweatshirt because he's done. He's just done with Nebraska. He was so frustrated. First game, Deion Sanders gets ranked. Like, are you kidding me? And we get the great Matt Rule, and we lose every game the same way. Nebraska fans are fed up. But if they win this game, that's what they need. They need that sugar rush.
It all changes. Yeah, I think. And listen, if Nebraska wins, like you said, it all changes in the dynamic for the way that is trended after 1 week of games. And if Colorado wins, the momentum just continues to build. Like if you thought Deion Sanders was everywhere after week 1, it's only going to get stronger after week 2.
And that's what they'll say about Matt Rule. Let's say they win this game, because this is huge. Most people are going to take Colorado. They're going to expect the Buffaloes to win. Let's say Matt Rule punches them in the mouth. Let's say they win 20-13 and they have a great running game. Well, then people are going to start switching and say, well, Nebraska probably should have won that Minnesota game. That was a crazy 4th and 10. Wow, the defense has really improved, since the Scott Frost era. So, for this game for Nebraska, this could change the whole perception around the country. Because, the defense was much improved against Minnesota.
Now, that might have had a lot more to do with how bad Minnesota's offense looked.
Absolutely.
Than anything else.
But if you compare what Nebraska was under Scott Frost, trench play was not great. 30 points a game, dysfunctional offense. So we'll see.
Speaking of dysfunctional offenses, no one had a more dysfunctional offense last season. There might have been one school with a more dysfunctional offense last season. But Texas A&M, they looked awesome in week 1. The Aggies did. They obviously didn't have a high-level marquee opponent in week 1, but A&M, they moved to 1-0. They looked really good in their first opportunity of the season against, let's see, who did they play in week 1? Yeah, New Mexico. They won 52-10. They look great. They now get a really important, really intriguing game going on the road at Miami. This is a rematch game from last season. Texas A&M is a 4-point favorite. Carson, I'm all on A&M. They had a lot of momentum in the offseason. I think that people got really high on them entering last season because they had the #1 recruiting class coming in. How often do freshmen really make a huge impact in the SEC? Not a lot. I mean, right? Like 5-star kids. Those are the type of kids that can make an impact. And Texas A&M had a lot of those. They had 18 top 100 recruits in that 2022 class. But they're still not going to make the impact across the board that you probably need from your juniors and your seniors in the SEC. I think this is a more experienced. This is an older SEC team. A&M is, and I think Bobby Petrino showed in week 1 that offense has some explosivity, and Connor Wegman looked good. Evan Stewart was prolific. He had 115 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 1. And then Noah Thomas also had a good game in week 1. He had 3 touchdowns in the receiving game for A&M. So I'm on A&M to go down to Miami and beat Miami and Coral Gables.
Yeah, it's not like they're going into this hostile environment with Miami. Van Dyke has not been the same quarterback that we saw 2 years ago, similar as we talked about with Brennan Armstrong. We liked what we saw with the offense, and this is what the doctor ordered, for Jimbo Fisher to give up play calling and to spark life into this offense. It kind of gets me nervous that I might have to pay you $1,000 in a couple of years.
No, I don't go that far.
National title. No, I'm kidding. But I like A&M. They got the talent, and I think they're going to control potentially the line of scrimmage. 4 points, I think Texas A&M wins 31-17 or something. I think this is an easy cover.
Yeah, I like what you said there about the line of scrimmage. I think that that's something worth diving into. Mario Cristobal builds his programs off of the line of scrimmage and toughness at the line of scrimmage. But Texas A&M probably has more depth there, and they probably have more experience there than Miami does. And they're also highly talented kids on the offensive and defensive line, particularly the defensive line. And I think what's going to be really interesting in this game is Miami has, I believe, 2 5-stars starting on the offensive line, both of which I think were on Bruce Feldman's free list entering the season. But this is our first real test, I think, for those 2 kids. And I know that A&M's got a really talented defensive line. I know they have some really dangerous players on the outside, and Connor Wegman looked great in week 1 at quarterback for A&M. So I'm on A&M. I think that this, like you said, I think they could roll. And I'll be interested to see what the after effects of this are, because these are generally two pretty impatient fan bases. And I think whoever loses this game, their fan base can be pretty upset. I mean, obviously, Miami goes, what was it, 5-7 last year, I think, under Cristobal in year one. And then obviously, Jimbo really struggled last year. They go 5-7 at A&M. So I think whoever loses this game is going to be feeling a lot of pressure.
Realistically, though, both these coaches are kind of in good situations with security, in my opinion, because I think Jimbo is an 8-4, 9-3 football coach. They're not going to be paying $80 million buyout to get rid of 9 wins. I mean, he's fine. And with Cristobal, I mean, how Scott Frost was supposed to work at Nebraska, Cristobal is Miami. Started at Florida International, proved it at Oregon. Second year of a fully guaranteed contract, I'm pretty sure, at Miami. He's trying to build it different. He's trying to make it, tough guy Miami football. But this Texas A&M, this is a bad matchup in week 2. And yeah, there might be some heat. In Miami, I thought they were going to be good last year. Manny Diaz wasn't a superstar, but that program won 7 to 8 games and could put up some offensive points. Last year was gross with Josh Gaddis as offensive coordinator. Gross.
Well, he's gone now. So
yeah. Well, he got fired.
I think that Cristobal pretty much tore it down in year 1 and kind of wants to build it up in his own way. And I think he's got a long runway to do that. And there seems to be a lot of financial investment from Miami's program that maybe wasn't there in the past. You combine those things. I think this is trending in the right way. They've recruited really well. We know he's going to do that. It just turns into whether or not Cristobal is going to be able to be an effective in-game head coach, which, Oregon fans talked a lot about him maybe not being the greatest thing in that area. And I think they feel pretty good about Dan Lanning in that aspect heading into week 2 at Texas A&M, where they're 6.5-point favorites. This is a game I'm all over Oregon on. I do think that Texas A&M will probably rebound. I think Texas A&M will look better than they did in week 1 at Wyoming. But I liked Oregon a lot coming into the season. I love the way Bo Nix played in week 1. I love the way that, Oregon just dominated Portland. In week 1, they put up T.O.'s number on them. So is there much to take away from that win for Oregon? No, probably not. But I do think there's a little bit more to take away from Texas Tech's loss against Wyoming. And I think people maybe really wanted Texas Tech to be really good this year, and maybe they will end up being really good. But a week 1 loss on the road in Laramie is tough. And they've got a really good opportunity to bounce back. But I like Oregon in this game.
81 points is impressive regardless, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
If you put up 81 points, I'm sorry. I'll tip my hat. Good job, Bo Nix. Bo Nix, dark horse Heisman contender every single year. We could see it. I like what he's doing with Dan Lanning. And you're right. Texas Tech was a 14-point favorite over Wyoming, and they crapped the bed. I mean, that is an unacceptable loss. If this point spread was 12, 14, Oregon, whatever, sure. But you're telling me Oregon's really not going to win by more than 1 possession? A team that could win the Pac-12 isn't going to go down to Texas Tech and take care of business? Now, I think it will be a good crowd. Texas Tech fans care about the At the end of the day, I honestly just think Oregon is a better football team. When I look at Texas Tech, it doesn't scream a bunch of first round, second round, third round talent.
No, I agree with you. Tyler Shaw looked good in week 1. He had 3 touchdown passes. Taj Brooks didn't have a great game running the ball for Texas Tech. And I do think that, the environment and the weather probably played into the struggles that Texas Tech had in week 1 up at Wyoming. There was a weather delay. So that's kind of tough to overcome in football.
Wyoming had it too, though.
Talks about it because they don't happen very often. But yeah, I like Oregon a lot in this game.
Yeah, I really have not much else to say about it. I like the Ducks. When I look at the Pac-12 teams, realistically, Oregon, Washington, USC, those are the big boys. Those are the top 3 that are heading over to the Big Ten. I don't know who wins the Pac-12 this year. I really don't. Could I see Caleb Williams outscore a bunch of teams? Absolutely. Could I see Penix maybe make a dark horse run for the Heisman? Yes. This Pac-12 conference is extremely entertaining. And I hope for their final year, they get a playoff team. But they might cannibalize each other. Realistically, couldn't you see a Pac-12 champ be 11-2?
Yeah, no, I could. I could very much see that. And I think it is without a doubt the most entertaining conference this season. there's 6, 7 teams in that league that are highly entertaining. You talked about USC, Washington, Oregon. You didn't mention Utah. They're going to be good. There's 4. Oregon State looked great in week 1 on the road at San Jose State. DJU throws for, I think, 5 touchdowns. They're ranked. There's a 6th. Colorado looks great in week 1. And they're going to be entertaining regardless of how that goes over the entire season. Colorado will be. So there's 6 or 7 teams in that division, or in that conference that will be fun. And I think we'd be remiss to not mention UCLA. I mean, Dante Moore had some really impressive moments in week 1, the former 5-star quarterback from Detroit area. He looked great in week 1 for UCLA. So I think you can even throw UCLA into that group. And there's some other intriguing programs out there that are kind of under first-year coaches and whatever else. So, yeah, I fully agree. I think the Pac-12 is going out in a really entertaining and an interesting way. And to be honest with you, I think it kind of fits it's kind of ironic that the Pac-12 and its, last year of true existence is kind of going out with its best year. It really fits the irony of the Pac-12.
Can't wait for the Netflix documentary.
Yeah, I hope Netflix doesn't do it because I didn't really think they did a great job with Swamp Kings, and I thought the Johnny doc was all right. Speaking of the Pac-12, let's stick in it. We're going to go with number 19, Wisconsin. They're a 6-point favorite at Wazoo. I really like Wazoo. I like watching them. For whatever reason, I've always just found Wazoo to be entertaining. Cam Ward is one of my favorite quarterbacks in the country to watch. I like Wazoo in this game. I like Wazoo a lot to cover basically a touchdown. They're plus 6.5. Yeah, I'm gonna take them. Going to Pullman's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a crazy environment. I don't know if Wisconsin will play in a tougher road environment this season than going on the road in Pullman.
They're playing at Memorial Stadium for Illinois. What are you talking
about? That'll be cake compared to going to Pullman. I'm all over Wazoo in this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if Washington State beats Wisconsin outright.
I'm taking Wisconsin outright, but for the point spread, I'm taking Washington State. Absolutely. Tanner Mordecai did not look good last week. Wisconsin, even though you're the air raid offense, they're really going to be relying on that running game with Braylon Allen.
Chez Mellusi was better in week 1 than Braylon Allen was. And now we know, history suggests that Braylon Allen will end up being better, but Chez Mellusi was incredible in week 1.
He had more of the big plays, but when they wanted to pull away from Buffalo, dude, you're like Braylon Allen's 240. Like that guy's arms, he's just ripped. I think Wisconsin's very good. They're gonna have to rely on that running game, but no, it's gonna be a tough environment in Pullman. Cam Ward's gonna put up some points against that Wisconsin defense. I see 27-23, 27-24. I think it's gonna be a great game. But yeah, I would not be shocked if Washington State wins outright. Now I need Wisconsin to win because I bet our friend Logan Anderson, $50 that Wisconsin would win 10 games this year. If they lose to Washington State and they still got to play Ohio State, the margin is gone. They better beat Illinois and Iowa.
Yeah, Cam Ward was incredible in week 1. He was 37 of 49 for 451 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air, and then he also had 40 rushing yards, so he had about 500 total yards of offense and another rushing touchdown. So he was responsible for 4 total touchdowns and about 500 yards by himself. His story is incredible. He transfers from Incarnate Word. Last year was his first season. I expected him to take a big step this year leading Wazoo's offense. I believe he reconnected with his old offensive coordinator down at Incarnate Word, but I could be wrong there. Yeah, I like Wazoo. I think Wazoo's good. I don't think Wazoo gets a ton of attention nationally with this team. And like I said, I think Cam Ward is pretty dangerous. And being completely honest, I think Wazoo has a quarterback advantage in this game. So I'm all over Wazoo. And like I said, if they win this outright, I wouldn't be shocked.
I agree. And looking at Washington State stats, not the worst rushing defense last year. Tanner's going to have to step it up. And we've seen with Tanner Mordecai, against Power 5 competition, he likes to throw some interceptions. So we'll see.
All right, Carson, let's get to the big one. Number 11, Texas. They're a touchdown dog. At number 3, Alabama, going into Bryant-Denny Stadium. Let's get into it. This should be a fun one. We obviously know all the headlines, the stories, all those things. It's a very anticipated game. It's been anticipated for an entire offseason. I'm fired up for it. Hopefully I'm able to watch most of it after the Cyhawk game.
Do you trust Milroe?
I don't think it comes down to Jalen Milroe, to be honest with you. I think this game comes down to how good each team's defensive line plays. Obviously, Texas feels really good about their defensive line with guys like Sweat returning and Byron Murphy also returning on their defensive line. I think the team that is actually able to control the line of scrimmage on the defensive side, whichever defensive line plays better, is going to be a team that probably wins this game. I think Quinn Ewers is going to have a few explosive pass plays to Adonai Mitchell, to Xavier Worthy, to Jatavian Sanders, their tight ends. But I don't think either team's really going to be able to run the ball. So whichever quarterback is able to hit a few explosive plays, I guess could be a determining factor. But I think if Texas's defensive line plays well, they've got a chance.
A lot of people freaked out last week because when they played Rice, that was not an offensive clinic per se. I mean, the first half was rough. Well, they scored 16 points in the first half, or held 2 goals, something like that. But, realistically, do you think Steve Sarkisian was showing everything in his playbook? Do you think he really wanted to give Nick Saban any indication of what they're going to run? So we can look at past offensive struggles against Rice. Just realistically, do we trust Quinn big picture against Alabama? Can he do it for 4 quarters? Because everybody loves to talk about Quinn Ewers had a great game against Alabama. He played 1 quarter. He had a good first quarter. We have not seen Quinn, take away the Oklahoma game, play 4 strong quarters in a big, big, big game. And it is hard for me to think. I'm starting to buy in Steve Sarkisian big picture, but it's hard to me to believe that they're going to go into Tuscaloosa and beat an Alabama team that is just loaded. And I think Milroe is good enough. And right now, I don't trust Quinn.
Yeah. I mean, those are all fair opinions. And listen, it's really hard to go on the road and win against a top 5 ranked team on the road. You don't need me to tell you that. Our listeners don't need me to tell you that. You know how many times Nick Saban has lost a home game since
Ole Miss, and those were pretty much the home games that he lost off time.
Well, he only lost 1 Ole Miss at home. That was back in 2015. I went back and did this week.
And he lost to Alabama in 2019.
Yeah, excluding his 2007 debut season, he lost in 2010 to Auburn, the comeback game. 2011, they lost 9-6 to LSU, but then they revenged that loss in the national championship, of course. 2012, they lost to Johnny Manziel. That was an incredible game. That was kind of Johnny Manziel's Heisman moment. They lost to Ole Miss in 2015. That was the 4th loss, excluding his first season in 2007. And they lost in 2019 to LSU. So basically within the last decade, they have lost one home game under Nick Saban at Bryant-Denny. And one of those losses was to arguably the greatest college football team of all time in 2019. So
by 5. With Joe Burrow just being an absolute dog.
And their own starting quarterback playing on a surgically repaired ankle from, I think, 2 weeks prior or something like that. So they don't lose at home.
No. Before the season, this looked like a sexier pick because people were scared. Okay, Tommy Rees, can he call plays? Oh my God, is Buckner going to be the quarterback? I don't think week 1 is the greatest indication, but I feel like around the country, I feel like it's been cooled down a little bit. Okay, can Milroe get the job done? Because we've seen this with Alabama before with previous Nick Saban teams. Jacob Coker is not a Heisman Trophy quarterback. Jalen Hurts, when he first got to Alabama, could not throw the football until he got to Lincoln Riley.
He was pretty good his first year throwing the ball. He got progressively worse for whatever reason offensively throwing the ball at Bama, and then he went to Lincoln Riley and turned it around a little bit. But even remember, when he was drafted by the Eagles in the 2nd round, his throwing ability is what was questioned.
Exactly. And even with Alabama, dude, that was a run-heavy team, read option, Jalen Hurts.
I'm just saying, when he first got there and was their starting quarterback, his weaknesses as a thrower weren't as exemplified as they were when he left or when he lost the job to Tua.
No, it got bad. But here's the big question. Can Milroe keep the ball in his hands? Because against Texas A&M last year, he played, and he had multiple interceptions. That's what kept Texas A&M in that football game. So if Alabama plays clean, I don't see how they lose. I really don't. I think big picture, Texas is here to stay, potentially, the way they're recruiting, just not week 2.
So are you saying you would think Alabama covers?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Texas covers this actually. I think Texas loses by less than a touchdown, but I do think that they lose. I just think it's really hard to go on the road and win at Bryant-Denny. People don't do it very often. You talked about the concerns about the way Quinn Ewers has played. He needs to hit deep shots in this game, and it's something that he struggled to do. Last year, he struggled to do it, and I think that there was, last year when he came back from his injury and he struggled to hit deep balls, his footwork was off. I don't think he was ever fully healthy after his AC joint injury that he suffered against Bama. But, all things considered, like, he has to be able to hit those balls this week to Xavier Worthy, to Adonai Mitchell, and to JT Sanders. And let's be honest, like, Texas is going to have to run the ball better than they did in week 1, too. I mean, Jalen Blue is going to have a better night. We don't know if Cedric Baxter is going to play. He was a top-ranked running back in that class. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see, I think, how well Texas is able to run the ball. Because even last year when they had Bijan, I think Bijan had less than 60 total rushing yards.
The problem with Alabama last year, why it was close, was just the penalties. I mean, they had 17 penalties against Texas. They had 17 against Tennessee, the game they had in 3-point games. Like most college football teams, if you have 17 penalties, you're screwed. It is so hard to beat Alabama. Like, Alabama's going to have to cut off their foot for them to lose this game outright.
Yeah, I mean, I don't go that far. Like, I do think there's a world where Texas wins this game and just outplays Bama. Like, there's a world where, like you said, I mean, Jalen Milroe doesn't have a great game. He's playing against what should be a really good defense. And Quinn looks like the recruit that he was ranked, and the receivers make plays, whatever else. Like, there's a world where Texas goes in here and wins. Texas is a talented enough team to do that. It's just really hard to conceivably see that from the jump. And listen, like, at the same time, like, well, I think there's a small chance that Texas wins. Let's say there's a 5% chance Texas wins this game, or whatever it is. There's an equal greater percent chance that Alabama just smashes them.
That's what I'm feeling, dude. I
don't think Texas gets smashed. I don't see that happening, because Texas always plays well in these games against these high-profile games. They always play Oklahoma well. They played LSU well. They beat Notre Dame a few years ago. They always play their prime non-conference game close. They just lose stupid games to teams like Oklahoma State and Texas Tech.
But this is a different animal.
Like, in a row.
When Texas was back in 2016, they beat a 4-8 Notre Dame team by 3. And then they lose to Cal the next week. Last year was a crazy game, but Alabama had 17 penalties. Quinn played the quarter of his life, and it was on the road. I mean, that was a good atmosphere with Texas for that game. If Alabama loses this game, historically what we've seen with Nick Saban teams is that they give up 43 to 45 points. Like that Ole Miss team that won in, 2015?
Yeah, they won in 2014 and 2015 against Bama.
On the road at Alabama, they gave up 43 points. Joe Burrow, puts up 46 points. The idea that this is going to just be a close, clean football game that Texas pulls out, they win 17-14, I don't think that's plausible. But hey, if Quinn shows up, wins the shootout, yeah, I think he could outduel Milroe. Absolutely. It's up to Quinn. Cliches.
I don't think that this is going to be a high-scoring game.
Then I think Alabama wins.
Yeah, I would lean that way. That's why I think Bama wins. But I think if it's a low-scoring game, I mean, if the winner of this game puts up 21, 24 points or less, I have a hard time seeing, assuming that's Bama who puts up 21 or 24 points, I have a hard time seeing that Texas isn't covering a touchdown spread. That's just my opinion on it. But I think you look at it a little bit further. The reason I think it's going to be a low-scoring game is because I don't think that Bama has the explosivity in their offense at the receiver position.
Compared to previous years, absolutely.
Compared to previous years. Last year, the reason that they came back and won was because they had Bryce Young put a cape on that last drive. And I do feel confident enough saying that, like, while Jalen Milroe is talented as a runner, and while Jalen Milroe is talented as a playmaker, I feel pretty confident saying that he's not Bryce Young. But that's just an opinion.
That's a hot take.
Maybe he proves me wrong.
That's a really hot take. Oof. It's going to be a great football game, though. I mean, this is what we love with college football. I feel like college football has had a renaissance with these big brands showing up, like Alabama, Texas, top 11. Yes. Colorado, Nebraska, all of a sudden being a kind of a relevant game. Like, that's awesome. USC's good. It's so good to be a college football fan. I would love to have the 12-team playoff this year because I would like to see Michael Penix just put up some points in the playoff. Like, I would like to see Bo Nix run around. I would like to see Penn State in the playoff this year. I mean, this 12-team playoff, I think, is going to save college football. Instead of watching these bowl games where everyone sits out, we're going to get entertaining, rejuvenated brands playing against each other at full strength. And that's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pro 12-team playoff. I think the 12-team playoff will be fun, but I would also use the caveat that I think people who believe the 12-team playoff is going to create new champions are going to be rudely awoken to the idea that that's not really going to be the result. And in fact, I would argue that it's going to open the door for the same champions to kind of have
A
a
mulligan.
mulligan type of game in the regular season, where I do think the 12-team playoff, a downside of it is that the regular season is potentially devalued a little bit.
I mean, that is a fair point. And that's always been the concern for college football fans because that's what made us different than the NFL. You know, like the New York Giants lose 7 games. Oh, crap. We won a
Yeah,
Super
like
Bowl.
the Chiefs season isn't over now.
Absolutely not. They're far from it. You know, you can lose 5 to 7 games and have a great year in the NFL. Lose 7 games in college football, you're playing the Brady O Beef Bowl. So, that's what makes it special. But I think 12 is the happy medium because we're still going to get 10-2 football teams. We're going to be understanding that Oklahoma can lose 2 games in the SEC and still be a pretty good football team. And I'd rather see a 10-2 Oklahoma in there than a 12-0 Tulane, realistically. So, and I think it's good for the sport.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. And I'm fired up for what the future of the sport could look like with the 12-team playoff. I'm also concerned what the future of the sport could look like in a year from now with how much change is coming. And I want to enjoy the hell out of this last season where I really like what the 4-team model did for the sport, and I really like the way the conferences are aligned right now. So I'm enjoying the 2023 season as much as I can.
Yeah. The Big the Big 10's been the Big 11, 12, 14. We didn't even get a 16. I was so excited when I thought USC would be unique and they were the only West Coast team. Now,
What about UCLA? You just keep forgetting UCLA.
Well, because no one's paying to watch UCLA. We are watching Caleb Williams. We're watching Lincoln Riley. But now with Oregon and Washington, I'm sorry. I'm not juiced up for Rutgers, Oregon, week 3.
Yeah, but you are juiced up for Oregon, Penn State.
More so.
My opinion on that whole matter is the people who bring up the Oregon, Northwestern, or Washington Rutgers, like that tells you where their opinion on the whole thing really aligns, is that they're thinking of it from the bad games that we're going to get, not the increased quality of good games.
Well, if you're a college basketball guy, it's not good.
It's not great. It's not great for any sport.
College basketball has been, taken victim by the college football landscape. But hey, they pay the bills. They pay for them to travel. So that's how it's going to work. Hey, I would be mistaken if I did not ask. You got to pick the Kansas-Illinois spread for me, please. Just real quick.
Yeah, I'm going to the game tonight, driving over to Lawrence. I do think it'll be an interesting game. I think it'll be close. I think if Illinois wins, it's going to come down to their line of scrimmage playing a lot better than it did in week 1 against Toledo. I think it'll be really interesting to see what KU's quarterback situation looks like. We know Jalen Daniels is going to play, but I would expect that Jason Bean gets a good amount of snaps as well. I think it'll be close. I think that if Illinois wins, it'll come down to the way their line of scrimmage plays. It's going to have to be a lot better than it was in week 1. I have Illinois covering, but I don't feel particularly confident about it. I don't know if I feel particularly confident either way on who wins this game because I feel like we don't know much about either of these teams after week 1. KU played Missouri State, and Illinois looked pretty poor against Toledo.
Yeah. I'm going to take Kansas, unfortunately. Illinois fans, don't kill me. But, hey, have fun at the game.
Hey, looking forward to it. Getting back to my old home state for a year. Well, not a year, about 8 months. Fired up. Be my first time at the booth, too, which I've heard not great things about. So maybe KU will show me a different atmosphere than what I've been told about the booth.
Yeah, you should post on your beat, hey, K-State fans, I'm at the Better Kansas School for the day.
Yeah, that'd be a great way for me to indoctrinate myself with the K-State fans who still choose to follow my work. That would really make them pleased, I'm sure.
Sounds good. ILL.
I. Thanks for listening, everyone. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Hopefully these picks win you some money if you take some of our bets, or if you want to fade them all, might be a good decision too. We'll be back on Sunday or Monday to recap what should be a wild week 2 with lots of high-profile games, potentially some impactful losses for teams across the country. Make sure to like us if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure to give us a rating if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We appreciate those, and they really help us out. So thank you guys very much. Enjoy your second full weekend of college football, everyone.